Well, good morning and welcome to Fizz. This is the fun, interactive Sunday school, and we've been to some interesting places. At the end of each video clip, I've been putting down some places that Lois and I have traveled to and asking you to try to guess where we've been. So far, nobody. Well, Chris Owens has guessed two places now, the Multnomah Falls and now the Bouchard Gardens. And it's 55 acres, and it's a Canadian National Historic Site. You can find some wonderful videos on YouTube and see that it came from a limestone quarry back in 1904. It was developed by the Bouchard family, Robert and Janine. And you'll find that in 1939 it was incredibly increased in size. Now it has lighting and music and fountains that dance to the music. I hope that you'll go on YouTube and take a look at the video. That's Bouchard Gardens in British Victoria Island, British Columbia, 900 varieties of flowers. Well, welcome back to Fizz, and I hope that you're enjoying the pictures and that you'll join in trying to guess the places. But that's not as important as learning about these proverbs. And so today we want to continue in chapter 4, but I think a fast review would be well in hand here. Chapter 1, we saw who wrote it, Solomon, and he had prayed for wisdom, and God certainly gave him that wisdom. He wrote over 3,000 proverbs. Here we only have 29 of his proverbs. Also in chapter 1, it revealed why he wrote them, and it appears that he left them specifically for his children. And he told us about sin, that we should resist it, and that we should understand the results of sin and realize that the importance of our friendships and our relationships, and that bad influences can come from people around us. Chapter 2, we didn't cover it all in Proverbs. For whatever reason, the lesson writer didn't use chapter 2, but it talked about seeking knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and also has some contrast of the paths of good and evil. Chapter 3 was, of course, I'm sure a lot of your favorite because of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, and trusting in the Lord with all your heart and leaning not on your own understanding, acknowledging him in all of your ways, and he'll direct your path. And also that we should accept his discipline because he loves us, and those whom he loves, he disciplines. Discipline is for our benefit. And continued in chapter 3 with part 2 with understanding those things that exemplify the 10 commandments. That is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. And then all of the others are kind of encompassed in one more commandment, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. And that certainly deals with all of the envy and all of the things that were in chapter 3 that we should not do. We learned 5 very important don'ts, and we also learned about compassion. Today we're going to start chapter 4, but before we do, I think it'd be good to just review a quick chart on the fact that we have choices. As a matter of fact, I belong to a thing called the Wendy's Advisory Council. Now, years ago, Wendy's Advisory Council asked me what I thought they should do, and I said, well, it seems to me that you ought to offer breakfast. In the little town of Columbus, there's a McDonald's, and they do a fantastic breakfast business. Right across the street is Wendy's, which is closed during the breakfast hours, and even when it opens at 11 o'clock, there are no breakfast items. And I don't know whether mine had a lot of influence or whether several other people made the same comments, but here we are a couple of years later from those advice that I gave, and Wendy's is now offering a breakfast. They offer a breakfast on a bun, which is, I think, bacon, egg, and cheese. They offer one on a biscuit, and they offer one on a croissant type roll. And that shows you the choices that we have in life. And now I want to advise to them that they should go ahead and have what they call a bacon stack, which would be bacon, egg, and cheese, a sausage, egg, and cheese stack, or a sausage stack, and they should have a ham or a ham stack, which would be ham, egg, and cheese. And then let the customer choose what kind of bread. So you could order whatever kind of stack you wanted, bacon stack, sausage stack, or ham stack, and then say, but I want it on croissant, or I want it on a biscuit, or I want it on a roll. And then you'd have even more choices. Well, life's full of choices, isn't it? As a matter of fact, I can remember years ago that Burger King, I believe it was Burger King, used to say, have it your way. So if you wanted a Whopper, you could have it with or without lettuce, with or without tomato, with or without mayonnaise, or with or without whatever you wanted. And even today, Lois doesn't like the sesame seeds on the top of the bun, and so we can order a Whopper for her, or a junior Whopper for her with 2 bottoms and no top, so that she has bread that has no seeds on it. Life is full of choices. And it certainly wouldn't be catastrophic if we ordered 2 Whoppers and I took the bottom from my sandwich and gave it to Lois, and I took the top and I had 2 tops and she had 2 bottoms for a Whopper. So there's a lot of choices that really aren't all that critical, but there are a lot of choices that are very important. And we get a chance to make a lot of choices. As a matter of fact, I've been working on my message for the weekend of July the 5th for First Baptist Landrum, where I'll get to preach for Mark, who's going on a little well-deserved vacation. And that message is going to be about independence. We all want our independence because we want to make our own choices. we 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 don't want to live under the thumb of our parents. We don't want to live under the thumb of a mate. We don't want the government telling us what to do, and we want to demand our independence. We want to demand our rights. I've been appalled by one of the recent postings saying that there's a small group of people who are saying, if we don't get what we want, we'll burn all of America down. Well, you know, that's taking independence a whole lot further than God ever intended for us to take our independence. So let's take a look and review, particularly in light of Proverbs constantly giving us the words knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and also constantly showing us contrast between the evil and the righteous way that we can go. And let's see if we can make some sense out of our choices. So let's take a look at this chart. Maybe you'll recall the illustration of the iron. The choices that we have is knowledge is information. The mother said to the daughter, the iron is hot and will hurt you. She had the knowledge. Then there was the wisdom. She touched the iron, she got burned. She knew the truth. The iron is hot and it will hurt you. And then finally, the understanding. She had the choice to act on the wisdom that she had and to not touch the iron again and not get burned again. And we have choices like that too. Let's look at Proverbs. Well, our lesson plan begins at verse 11, but I think it's always good to take a look at the full context. So in chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, we find the father, Solomon, saying to his son, listen to the instruction of your father so that you'll gain understanding. Now remember, the understanding is not only the knowledge, it's the wisdom, and then to gain the understanding is properly applying that wisdom so that we don't get burned. Now, when I was a young man, I remember lots of times my father would give me wisdom. And sometimes I would listen to it and sometimes I wouldn't listen to it. That's choice. And that's what today's lesson is all about. Here, Proverbs 4, in those first 10 verses, Solomon is saying, when I was a boy, my father said. Now, I bet you most of us could say that. We may say, when I was a little girl, my father or mother said, but we can remember some things that our fathers and mothers said to us, and it was way beyond wearing clean underwear in case you're in an accident. But here we have Solomon's wisdom, and he's referring back, and he's saying, I can remember my father David saying to me when I was a lad, here are the things you should do and shouldn't do, and here's some things that are wisdom and knowledge for you to put in your memory banks. Well, he also goes on and tells us that we should acquire wisdom, hopefully not always in getting burned. Hopefully we can learn by maybe seeing others' mistakes. I know that Solomon probably had a chance to hear his father talk about how he had gained knowledge, and how he gained some wisdom, but maybe didn't apply the understanding. And maybe Solomon could think about some of those things that David shared with him. But here's what he says as he closes out those first 10 verses. Hear and accept my sayings. And then we begin with today's lesson plan. Let's take a look at verses 11 and 12. I have directed you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in the upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded, and if you run, you will not stumble. Take hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Well, there's actually 3 verses, wasn't it? Verse 11, he says, I led you in the way of wisdom. In verse 12, he says, walk, and your steps will not be impeded, even if you run. In verse 13, he says, hold, do not let go, guard. 3 things that he tells us to do in verse 13. He says, hold them, do not let them go, and guard them. Now, recently I went to the grocery store, and I want to illustrate these 3 points. I wanted to get just what we needed, and I had Lois write a grocery list. All of us are a little uncomfortable with masks on, and I was going to be wearing a mask in the grocery store, and so I wanted to be sure that I went to the places that I needed to go and nothing extra. So Lois wrote the grocery list. I took the grocery list and I rewrote it in the order in which I find the things in Ingles grocery store. I know exactly, starting from right to left, that I'm going to have groceries. Then behind the groceries will be the produce. First is the produce. And then right behind that would be hot dogs. And then down the next aisle would be bread, and then so on and so forth. And so I know the order in which I find the items in Ingles. So I wrote the list in that order, and I went back and rechecked the list to be sure it was covering everything that Lois and I had put on the list. And asked Lois again just before I went out the door, Lois, is there anything else that we need? And we both agreed that since our daughter was coming up, it might be good to have some frozen pizzas so that when she came, we could quickly cook some pizza for she and the grandgirls. Well, how do we apply that to these 3 verses? I had some knowledge. I had knowledge of where everything was in the grocery store. I had some wisdom and the fact that I wanted to make as little time in the grocery store as I possibly could, so I laid out a path that would be in the order of the list. And I also wanted to be sure that I didn't proceed in the path of evil. So I made sure that I had my grocery list with me, and that I wasn't going to let it go, and that I was going to guard it. So I put it in my left front pocket. However, I had a number of other stops to make. I needed to drop off some stuff at the recycling bin in Tryon. I needed to go to Tryon Lumber and get some lumber. I needed to stop at the hot spot to get some gasoline, and then finally on to Ingles, and after Ingles to Wendy's to get lunch. By the time I had finished making my stop at the recycling bin, the hot spot, when I got to Ingles, I reached into my left front pocket, and guess what? Someplace along the line, I had dropped my grocery list, the one I had taken such great care to lay it out. Well, I had knowledge. I had wisdom, the fact that I should go in the right order. But listen, there were 3 things that it said to do in verse 13. Listen to what those 3 things were again. Hold it. Well, I didn't do a very good job of holding it, did I? It's important that we hold on to the things. Don't let it go. And obviously, somehow, when I dug into that left front pocket, whether it's at Tryon Lumber or whether it's at Hot Spot, to get something else out, my keys or whatever it was, I dropped that list. I didn't hold on to it. And I certainly didn't guard it. So I did the only sensible thing I could do. I got on my cell phone and with my mask on, I called Lois and I said, I'm in the grocery store. I can remember most of the items that were on the list, and I'm going through the grocery store in the order that I know that I need to go. Would you go get the original list that we wrote, which was not necessarily in the right order for the grocery store, and read it to me? And she did. She went to the garbage pail. She got out the original list, and she read me the items on the list. I wrote them down. I held on to that list. I didn't let it go. I guarded that list so that when I was ready to check out in the grocery store, I could check off the items as I put them on the conveyor belt. Are you going ahead of me yet? We had discussed pizza. We had never put it on either list. And so when I got home and laid out the items for Lois, guess what wasn't there? The pizza. You see, it wasn't enough for me just to hold on to that list. It wasn't enough to not let it go. But I needed to guard that list. I needed to be sure that everything, including the pizza, was on that list. And exactly what Solomon is saying here. He said, you need to be sure that what I instruct you in, you hold on to. Don't let it go. Don't forget about it. Guard it. Be sure that you've got it. And then you'll be successful. Let's take a look at the next two verses, 14 and 15. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not proceed in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Do not pass by it. Turn away from it and pass on. In the previous three verses, we saw three do's: hold it, don't let it go, and guard it. In these passages, verses 14 and 15, we see three do nots. Do not enter the path of the wicked. Don't enter the path of the wicked. Number two, do not proceed. If you do enter the path, it's kind of like Paul used to say, didn't it? But if you do sin, well, he says, okay, if you do get onto the path, don't proceed. Don't go any further down the path. Make a U-turn. Get off of that path. And the third do not is do not pass by it. Now, what does that mean? Well, I remember a story a long time ago in one of the Christian magazines. Was teaching a lesson, and it talked about the fellow who had a drinking problem. And he was pretty successful in not drinking for a few days. But about the third day, one of his friends saw him over in a corner, drunk as a skunk. And he said, what happened? You were doing so well for a couple of days. And he said, well, I passed by my old favorite bar. And his friend said, my friend, you need to take a different road. Well, that's exactly what the proverb is saying here. First of all, he says, don't go down the road. But if you do, turn around, stop. He says, do not proceed on that road. And then thirdly, he says, do not pass it by. In other words, don't go down that road. If you know there's an area that you're tempted in, if you know that there's some areas where you're going to be tempted, don't even go near those areas. If you're an alcoholic, you need to stay away from going in front of a bar. And if you have a tendency to lust, you probably don't want to go down to the beach because I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of temptation down on the beach in those skimpy outfits that some of the gals wear. So he's saying, okay, look, don't go down the path. But if you do, don't proceed down the path. Turn around 180 degrees. And if you're tempted, don't even pass by that temptation. Don't even go in the area of that temptation. It makes a lot of sense to me. I hope it does to you too. So don't go down the path. But if you do start to go down the path, turn around, make an 180-degree turn right away. And don't even go down the road that might lead you to temptation. That's what Solomon's trying to tell his son. Let's take a look at the next passage. Here's a picture of the wicked. For they cannot sleep unless they do evil, and they are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. Notice the progression here. In verse 16, it says, the wicked can't even sleep unless they do evil. And they're not happy until they make somebody else stumble. And their character is one that they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. They just aren't happy unless that's their lifestyle. That's their particular way of living their lives. Verse 18 and 19, but the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is darkness, and they do not know over what they stumble. Here's one of those wonderful contrasts that Proverbs does so very well. He talks about the path of the righteousness first, and he says, you start out as a Christian and with understanding and wisdom, and it's just like the light of dawn. And as you grow and as you know more, it gets brighter and brighter until you reach the full day. I can remember saying a couple of times, I wish I knew when I was 18 what I know today. Well, we get smarter and smarter, don't we? Especially in our Christian walk and what we need to do and what we need to stay away from. And so we have this picture of the righteous and their path getting brighter and brighter. But then it's contrasted with the wicked's path, which starts out in darkness and gets so bad that they don't even know what they're stumbling over. I don't know about you, but if I'm out on a dark night and there's no moon out and I'm in the woods or someplace where I don't know where I am and I stumble, I sure want to know what I stumbled over. Let's take a look at the next passage of Scripture. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are like life to those who find them and health to all of their body. Okay, so the text says, incline your ear to hear. Then keep them in your sight. That's your eyes. Keep them in your heart. Store them there in your heart. And verse 22 tells us why. Because they'll be life to those who find them and health to your body. Now, let me give you a silly illustration. Suppose I go to the doctor and he says, you have high blood pressure, which I do. And he says to you, I want you to take one pill daily. And he says, be sure you take them every day. And be sure you keep them where you'll remember to take them. Well, he's given me knowledge, hasn't he? And I have understanding that if my blood pressure is going to stay where it needs to stay, I need to listen to what he said, to take one daily. I need to be sure that I keep them in my sight. That is, I need to keep a medicine bottle someplace where it'll remind me every morning to take my blood pressure medicine. And then I need to store them in that place where I'll be able to keep them in my sight. And what's the result in verse 22? That it'll give me life because I found that I'm going to apply what the doctor told me to do. Let's take that spiritually. God says, here are the things to do and here are the things to not do. And he says, listen to me. Keep them in your sight. Remember, spend some time in God's word every day so that you keep his rules and his regulations and his do's and don'ts clearly in your sight. And hide them in your heart that you might not sin against him. And what will happen? You'll have life, and you'll have life abundantly. It'll be good for your body. And so let's take a look at verses 23 through 24. Here's a couple more don'ts. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you the deceitful mouth, and put devious speech far from you. The way to watch your heart is to do the two things that we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to tell lies. We're not supposed to be deceitful. That's lies. We're also not supposed to be devious, and that's half-truths. That's distortions. We need to be careful what we say, and we need to be sure that what comes out of our heart is righteousness, not unrighteousness. Let's take a look at our last verses, 25 through 27. Let your eyes look directly ahead and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Turn your foot from evil. So it tells us to put our eyes directly ahead. You can't look back on where you've been. You can't do anything about what you've done, but you can make sure where you're going. And by listening to God's wisdom, allowing that to become knowledge in our hearts, and then hopefully learning wisdom, not from bad experiences, but from good experiences, and then applying that through understanding to our lives. We'll make sure that we have a good path in front of us, and we'll keep our eyes on that path so that we won't stumble with our feet and make mistakes that God doesn't want us to make, and make sure that our ways are established. Now, the backdrop behind me now is another new picture to add to the pictures to try to identify. This one's a lot more familiar to a lot of people, so maybe somebody can write in quickly and tell me before Chris Owens says exactly where it is, and I know he'll know that. So we'll just ask you to watch for that and to see if you can tell us where I am right now.